The world needs ingenuity. Ingenuity needs accelerators. That's where you come in. Be the tipping point from impossible to impact at MIT Sloan School of Management.
Spring weekends are all about family, sunshine, and enjoying the season together. Before everyone arrives, I stop by my local Total Wine & More to grab a great bottle. Maybe a favorite we already know and love, or something new to try with the meal. With so many bottles to choose from, it's easy to discover something amazing. And the lowest prices make it easy to grab an extra bottle for everyone. Find what you love and love what you find, only at Total Wine & More. Curbside pickup and delivery available in most areas. Visit TotalWine.com to learn more. Spirits not sold in Virginia and North Carolina. Drink responsibly. B21.
Here's a tip for you. There's a podcast out there with fans waiting to be your next customer. They tune in every week, they trust the host, and that host wants to talk about brands like yours in their own words to their audience. The problem is, you just haven't been introduced yet. We're Acast, where that introduction happens. As the world's largest podcast marketplace, we let you browse shows, see who's listening, and book host-read sponsorships or run your own ads, all from one platform. Transparent pricing, real-time data, complete control. Start advertising on podcasts by visiting acast.com/advertise.
This series is sponsored by Books at One, a social enterprise dedicated to transforming bookshops into community hubs that promote literacy nationwide. Welcome to Aran Island This, a podcast series where we talk to Irish people from different walks of life as they reflect on their own journeys. Join me, Russell McDermott, as we explore the many aspects of Irishness and what it means to each of our guests through life's ups and downs. Maurice Manning, welcome to Aran Island This.
Thanks very much. Great to be here.
And have you been to the Aran Islands? Don't tell me.
I have not been to the Aran Islands. It's a blot on my escutcheon, as they would say. I don't really know why. I think I tended to find places I really liked in my early days. Places like Derrynane in Kerry, where I had some idyllic holidays. And I spent a lot of time in Donegal, where my great late friend Dermot Walsh, his family had a hotel there, and we tended to gravitate up there. We weren't a family.
Carrigart, wasn't it?
Carrigart, the Carrigart and Dunfanny, yeah. But we weren't a family that went on holidays together. My mother didn't approve of holidays, and my father's idea of a holiday was to be away from all of us playing golf. So, but the thing, I mean, I'm talking about the 1950s, and, you know, a holiday was going to Tramore, staying in a boarding house, and that didn't appeal to my parents. We weren't consulted on the matter. So when I started going on holidays really was when I was in college, and it didn't have much money. Yeah. And holidays were where the lads were going, and you'd head off. And so it was Kerry, which I loved, Derrynane, and Donegal, which intrigued me, because they're the loveliest people in the world, and yet politically they were the most contrary people you'll ever meet. But I loved Donegal. They were my places. And funnily enough, I never got to Aran. I lived a little vicariously through it, because my great friend and mentor, Tim Pat Coogan, lived on Aran, and he told me a great number of stories, and he talked about it all the time, so I picked it up that way. But I was never a Connemara fan. There was something very mercenary, I thought, about the Gaeltacht, and I didn't trust people particularly. North Connemara is a bit different, but I could be into racial stereotypes now, so I better end up there.
Well, I've been to Aran Islands, I've said about 3 times, and the weather's always been good. I'd be afraid to go back in case I got one of those windswept days which would shatter the illusion.
Yeah.
You're from Carlow originally, is it?
From Bagenalstown, yeah. My mother's family are long-time Carlow people. They were Nolans, and of course Nolan's a very common name in Carlow. And my father was from East Galway, and he came to work in Bagenalstown, where he met my mother. And although he was a blow-in there for the rest of his life, as you are in small towns. Yeah.
And how do you describe yourself, Maurice? Are you a writer, a politician, peacekeeper? How do you see yourself looking back?
I describe myself as having had a very lucky career, that the breaks came at particular times which I mightn't have expected. And I mean, I choose to study politics and history partly by accident. I was half thinking of law. And at that stage, you kept being told if you didn't have family connections, you wouldn't make it, which was total nonsense because, I mean, in my class, schoolmates from Rockwell was John Murray, who had no family connections but became Chief Justice, and a whole lot of other fellows who went on who didn't have any connections. But I was put off. But actually, I loved history. And then I was in the first year ever that politics became a full degree subject. Tom Garvin and myself, Tom and I, there's only a month between us in age, and we shadowed each other with a friendly rivalry, but I think great affection as well through all until poor Tom died just a year or two ago. But I don't know, I loved college, but I was lucky in that a new Department of Politics had been set up, and the reason for that's a bit odd. Trinity had a Department of Politics. It had very high-profile people like David Thornley and Basil Chubb. And the philosophy department in UCD was totally run by the clerics. The Archbishop of Dublin, in effect, through Monsignor Horgan, ran it, and all the chairs were held by priests. But they decided that if Trinity had politics, then the Catholics should have it as well. So department, and that's the truth. And the department was set up, and I was one of the first graduates. And at the age of 23, when it expanded and they hired two people on the same day, Brian Farrell as a senior lecturer and me as an assistant. And assistant was permanent and pensionable. Now, that's an extraordinary thing at the age 23.
What year was that then, Mark?
I was 23.
What year was it?
That would have been 1966.
66, wow.
And the salary was £920 a year. But you could live very well on £920 a year. But I loved it, and I was very lucky there. And I discovered, and others will be the judge of this, but I discovered I liked teaching. And I had an affinity with it, and I liked working with students, and I liked the subject. You know, it was new, it was developing. I mean, the first book on modern Irish politics was Basil Chubb, a source book of Irish politics. That was, you know, the beginning, and nobody else, there was no publications, nothing. And I was then lucky that when I did my MA, I picked a very good subject. It was the Blueshirts. And I didn't know, I'd often heard what they were and knew about them, but nothing effectively had been written, a few short essays. And so I had 2 great years doing research on the Blueshirts. And there's no freedom you'll ever have again like you had when you were an MA student. And I could do all sorts of other things in between. Like I worked for the Fine Gael press office in the 65 general election, and I got to know a lot of people, including James Dillon, about whom I later wrote a biography.
Did you get access to his papers then? Did you any of that?
I'll tell you that story in a minute about James, but yeah, you were asking about luck, and I just happened to be at a time when, again, Ireland was waking up. It was the beginning of the economic recovery, and people were actually believing they could get jobs in Ireland. And there was an air of optimism. And the Vatican, I know this is all cliche really, but the Vatican Council did have a huge effect on all of us, because the Catholic Church at this stage was more powerful than the state. And which is mainly why the anger of so many of our best writers were directed against the Catholic Church, because it was the real focus of power. And so the Vatican Council introduced a whole range of questioning, and new voices emerged, and lay people, as they were called, like Garrett Fitzgerald and so on, were beginning to get to treat political issues as moral issues and so on. And it was a fascinating time and a great time to be just in at the beginning of it. And then all sorts of issues came along. Like,
and did you consider yourself political or not?
Oh, yeah. My family background, my mother was about as blue as they could come and would never see any other point of view. My father was the opposite. He came from East Galway, and as they call it in East Galway, Fianna Fáil. And he was a strong Fianna Fáiler. But he was so busy, I suppose, big family and a business, that we didn't really discuss politics, but he would have been the first time he ever voted Fine Gael in his life, and it may be the only time, was when my brother Joe ran for the Dáil in the late 60s, early 80s or thereabouts, yeah. So I was political. I was fascinated from an early stage. And again, it seems like a cliche, but in college, a lot of the ambitious guys my own age were going for Fianna Fáil. They said, you have to get into Fianna Fáil. You won't get on without being in Fianna Fáil. And, and Fianna Fáil at that stage had the country nailed down. They controlled everything. At local government, semi-state bodies. And if you weren't Fianna Fáil, and this was the thing, and I didn't like that. And it was also the time of, God, it's harmless by today's standards maybe, but it was the beginning of TACA and all of that Fianna Fáil fundraising from big business. So like most students, I went against what was the main thing. But I was hugely influenced by Declan Costello. I got to know him very well. And his writings did have an effect on me. I suppose I was terribly idealistic, because if you're not idealistic at that stage, it's a bad sign. But I was, and Declan did have an influence on me.
Are you still idealistic? Or has that been tarnished over the years?
Sadly, I'm not. I wish I were. And I think
does that come with age or just experience?
It does, and it bothers me, because when I look at younger people in politics today, I forget that they have an idealism that I don't recognise anymore. And I try to, if I see somebody I think is really good, I always try to encourage them to stay at it. But age does make you that little bit cynical, and I try to fight against it.
And it was a disappointment that you didn't get a Dáil seat, and your attempts. Well, you got in, but not long enough to make an impact. I canvassed for you in Darndale. It was in 81, and then we had those 80s where there was elections every 2 weeks.
I came into politics by accident. In 1979, when Garrett Fitzgerald became leader, I wrote to him and said, look, I was doing an awful lot of radio work at this stage and writing and so on. I was a commentator. I said, if ever I can be of any help. I got a phone call from Peter Prendergast in 1979 to say, would I run for the European Parliament? I said, I always remember what my old headmaster said to me in Rockwell. As we were leaving, he said, boys, the only thing you'll ever regret in life are the things you don't do. And that is... I've used that in judging all of my big decisions in life. And I said, why not? Now, I thought I'd be elected. You don't ever run. Whereas, in fact, I was the sweeper. I was being groomed maybe for a Dáil seat, but I was the third person. Richie Ryan, whom I really, really liked, and what a very funny man, told me some wonderful stories. Richie and Nuala Fennell, good woman, decent woman, and myself were the candidates. And I was the sweeper. So I lost my deposit. But I had run. And I discovered I liked it. I liked the interaction with people. But then I was off in the States. I'd been in the University of West Florida for a year, research, but fascinating year that's another story, but I was able to tour all of the Deep South states on behalf of the European Commission, as it was then, giving lectures to Elks and Rotarians about what Europe was about, which they knew nothing about.
They had no clue.
And things haven't changed that much either. But
Mississippi.
I remember appearing in a place in Biloxi, Mississippi, a phone-in radio program, and the interviewer had been a GI in Germany. That was his entire knowledge of Europe. And he began by saying, this evening we're very privileged to have one of the 9 members of the European community, Dr. Maurice Manning.
Maurice Manning.
So for a whole hour I was in anxious state. Nobody phoned in. But anyway, that was great. But I had just come back from that, and a problem arose in Dublin North East. Dick Burke was going to run there, and then he moved to the safer confines of Dublin West, Castleknock, Blanchardstown and so on. So they were stuck for a candidate. And I got a call again from Peter Prendergast, would I run? Now, apart from being to the King Citric and Dublin Airport and Hothen, I didn't know the north side. I was living in Foxrock.
That's right.
Which meant that on the ballot paper I put my address as Park Corrigan-Chuddig, but it didn't fool anybody. but being from Foxrock wasn't the best thing. And I ran in the election campaign.
But you run in Galway before, that was your first?
Was my first run.
Yeah, it was your first run.
Well, apart from the European one, it was my first run. I didn't know the area.
Yeah. I lived in Sutton at the time. I could have told you a lot about the area.
Yeah, it was great because the party was divided. Well, the party is always divided. Yeah. Every party is always divided. And I got no help from my established running mate. But an awful lot of the local people who didn't want him supported me. And a lot of my students, including yourself, came out and worked for me. And
we got free beer in the old seating afterwards.
Yeah.
That was our payback.
Yeah.
But I still remember making knocks on the door with black flags. It was hunger strike time.
Hunger strike time.
You lived in Foxrock. I was a UCD student.
Yeah.
And we weren't prepared for dialogue is pushing it. It was very blunt.
Yeah.
Please take care and go.
Yeah. Although I got used to that. Curiously, I found at public meetings and a lot of issues, and anger was the main
thing.
Default position. People roared, shouted, insulted you. And I was taking it very personally. And then someone said to me, don't take it personally. And I didn't. And then I felt I could have a few jars with the lads afterwards. And I got to know them. And even if they were still shouting at me, it could almost became a bit of a game that you could do it. But it's a tough life, being it, as I say, I was coming from academe.
Yeah.
And from Foxrock.
Yeah.
So it was a tough...
No, I admire you because I've gone on canvas for Cormac Lucy recently in the last 2 years locally in O'Leary.
Yeah.
And knocking on doors, trying to converse with people who don't want to converse. If they answer the door,
right.
you don't need to be sensitive.
That's right. You don't. No.
So I admire you that in terms of resilience.
Yeah.
And the lecturing politics has been your life. You've progressed through that.
Yeah, I did. I lost my seat in 87. And I only lost it by a few votes. And I lost it, strangely, because of the Irish shipping was being abolished by the government. And a huge number of Irish shipping people lived in the Raheny area. And I had good support there. It's a thing I often regret. I should have voted against the legislation. And I was on the point of it. It was the only time I was ever really going to vote against the party. And in the end, for whatever reason.
Was there a whip then?
Oh, yeah.
So I
would have lost the whip, but I would have been re-elected.
I mean, it's easy on reflection to say you should have gone against it, but at the time it probably wasn't.
I had everything, or quick decisions. Yeah. And if I had, because they specifically targeted me in Raheny ballot boxes, and I lost by 40 votes. But that's politics. Yeah. And I often thought of what would have happened, because I would have been elected had I defied the whip. But there you go. I got into the Senate then, and I really enjoyed working there.
15 years, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that was a joyous, as long as politics can be.
It was, because there's a different atmosphere and a different pace. And I liked looking at legislation and examining it and being able to influence that. But that, as you say, all good things come to an end. And after the Fianna Fáil devastation of 2002, I was surplus to requirements, quite rightly. As I say, all political careers ended, whatever it is. It wasn't tragedy, but I was simply told, you're surplus to requirements. You're not going to win a Dáil seat for us, and we're not running you as a candidate. It was brutal stuff, but it was right. They were right. And they got in Brian Hayes in my place, and he won a seat subsequently and held on to it. So that was 2002. I was very lucky because the government had just set up, under the Good Friday Agreement, the Human Rights Commission. And it was new. Judge Donald Barrington was chair, but just for a year, and they needed a permanent chair. And for some reason, they said they wanted somebody who had both political and common sense. And they thought I had both of those, especially the latter, because there was a danger that it would be taken over by zealots and but that mightn't reflect well on me, that I wasn't seen as a zealot. But anyway, it was Bertie's government, so I was appointed with the support of all parties. And I had 10 years then really setting up the first Human Rights Commission, and that was interesting.
And would you go into politics now? If all things are equal, going back, is that a career you see now somewhere?
Russell, you should ask that question because I'm often asked for advice by students or by their parents, really, about what they should do. And there are two careers I don't advise people to go into now. One is academe, that most jobs are temporary. They're on fixed-term contracts. And if you're very good, then go for academe and take your chances. But if you're not sort of stellar, it's going to be a tough haul, and you'll be going from one 3 or 2.5 year contract to another and so on. And it's very hard to get a mortgage if you've no
So there's no tenure as such?
There's no tenure.
Okay.
And it's a lot tougher and more difficult. And the other, curiously, is journalism. When I was lecturing, some of my best students, often with my advice, well, not on my advice, but I would have pushed them that way, became journalists. Conor Brady, Stephen Collins, David McCullough, David Davenport, God rest poor DDP. Yeah, I really liked DDP. But they all became journalists and made good careers. But nowadays, journalists you're not going to get a permanent job, or there are so few of them, and most of them are, you're as good as your last story or your last pod or your last whatever it was. Yeah. So they're different.
Broadcasting has changed, yeah.
And politics is different as well. Politics isn't getting people with life experience, like people who've been in business, or people, say, who's been a doctor and practiced for years, or a solicitor, or somebody who has worked in the real life and then come into politics and bring in that lived experience with them. An awful lot of the people now, if you look at the Dáil, Tim Ryan's great book on the composition of the Dáil and Seanad, you see the number of social workers, activists, social activists, party, SPADs, as they're called, advisors. And for the life of me, I can't see why.
Well, nowadays it would be 16 Peter Prendergast. You know what I mean?
That's it.
And in those days, it one, maybe two.
But they're all coming from very narrow backgrounds, and they're all utterly influenced by what the media would think.
In the same bubble.
And I mean, I think I think Simon Harris is a good example of somebody who listens too much to this sort of thing and should... Maybe I'm unfair to him, but I get that sense. So I think that the pool that people are being drawn from, county councillors are different. They have always a very good knowledge of how the welfare system works, how the local education system works, how local government works, and they bring that in with them. And I remember when I was elected and talking to Joe Lee, the great historian, who's also a senator, and he said to me that when he came in, he had a certain sort of, not contempt, but didn't have great regard for a lot of these fellas, county councillors, heavy men, And then he said, after listening to a few debates, these people knew how legislation would impact on real people.
And how it all worked, yeah.
And that's where he changed his mind completely. And I developed a huge respect for most of the politicians I knew during my time. There were very, very few.
You've got social dialed in. Search is doing its thing. So why do your marketing results look the same as 6 months ago? That's because you're fishing in the same pond as everyone else. Podcast listeners are a different audience entirely. More engaged, harder to reach through traditional channels, and ready to act when someone they trust makes a recommendation. We're Acast, and we put them right in front of you. Browse thousands of the world's leading podcasts, book host reads or run your own ads, and track every conversion in real time. Same skills you already have, brand new results. Acast. Acast.com/advertise.
That I would dislike or have a bit of contempt for. Most of them were really good people. Now, today, you don't get that spread within the Dáil. I mean, if you look around, there are very few people who have made something themselves before coming in. I mean, we had Peter Barry, who had been a successful business, brought in all of that, and many others like that. Yeah. Hugh Coveney, but I can think of quite a few. Or even fellas who had their own small businesses and came in and brought that sort of common sense with them.
Yeah. You know how many beans weighed 6? They've at least been there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is being Irish and Irishness important to you, Maurice?
It's very hard to define Irishness. And I certainly in my younger days, I was good at Irish in school and got the gold medal for Irish debate in Rockwell. But I never warmed to it. There was something about the Gaeilgeoir world that was very stultifying, judgmental, narrow, bigoted sort of thing. I think that's changed completely now. I think the Gaelscoil have worked wonders, and that people genuinely are doing what maybe my generation should have been doing. But I was turned away from Irish. I saw it as being, if you wanted certain careers, you went after it. And I thought there was huge hypocrisy about politicians who had 2 sentences of Irish, a Card Gael, it's more on an or and all of that sort of stuff. So laying down policy, compulsory Irish and so on. So that sort of Irish has never appealed to me. I did always, especially when I was overseas, feel Irish and felt...
But being overseas is a different sensation.
There's a different sense of it.
You're kind of released from that.
You're released from that, and I was always astonished at how well liked the Irish were. I mean, you worked in Boston. Yeah. I did as well, worked in the States.
I never did Irish in my life because I lived abroad all my life.
That's right.
So I never learned Irish. I never got that. I found it very repressive when I came back.
Exactly. And I would feel much the same. But there has been a huge, huge revival, or maybe birth, in various aspects of culture, being film, music, drama, writing. I mean, some of the both in English and Irish, there is a whole new cultural awakening, which I think is great.
Yeah. And when you go abroad, you are not applauded, but being Irish is not something you have to hide. It was in the UK for a period when I worked there, but now it's very different. And younger people look at us and say, what are you guys talking about? We're the coolest people in the planet.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, and you're working in HCR. You enjoy that?
No, I was chair of when I was head of the Human Rights Commission.
Human Rights,
I was elected chair of the European group of Human Rights Commissions, and that was fascinating because you were working with people from the Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, and all of that, where they were becoming democratic, but largely surface, where they were fighting against very authoritarian governments. I mean, Hungary is the great example at the moment. Maybe Czechoslovakia is going that way, where you have a facade of democracy, but authoritarianism, and the human rights type of groups are the enemies of the state, and they're repressed and so on. So that was a great insight. Armenia as well was part of it, and I enjoyed that very much.
Well, suffering you saw, people's struggles to battle for their rights in different places, was that?
Well, yes, we, in a way, there was only so much as an NGO could do. We were largely led by the Danes in those days, and we followed their example, and we did achieve a high standing among the other human rights commissions, but like a lot of things, it's in a bubble. You know, and you
can see what you want to see or not see what you don't want to see. Yeah. And personal resilience. You've had a few challenges yourself, haven't you?
Resilience.
Does something mean something to you?
Oh, it does very much. I'll give you 2 very personal examples of where I have seen resilience. First is my brother Conor, who died just a year ago, and he had cancer, and I'm 20 plus years older than him. I'm the oldest of 10. Wow. He was the youngest, and he had cancer, and the way he fought that was extraordinary. But he did one very brave thing. Our family background is furniture making, and Conor had his own business where he went to townhouses, largely in places like Chelsea and Kensington, and bespoke furniture for them, fitted them out. It was all very profitable and good. Then came Brexit and COVID, and then he got cancer. You know, so he decided he couldn't run a business anymore, and he decided he had to do something else. And he decided he loved driving, and he became a driver of the big trucks, you know, the HGVs, became delivering around the country while his cancer was still under control. I thought it was an extraordinary, brave thing for someone to do, but he loved it. He loved being on his own, his music. He could talk to people or not talk if he didn't want to.
Breaker.
But he was so stoic, and he was great. And he knew he was dying, and he wrote the speech which his son read at his funeral, where he said, reviewed his life, no self-pity, none of that, but he was able to tell people what he felt about them. But I thought, see, being the oldest, I was left home when he was born.
Yeah.
And I never really knew him.
Yeah, I have the same issue, yeah.
Until the last few years.
Yeah.
And we became very, very close and had great chats with him. The other example is my own son, Nick, who's a super guy. And he got cancer about 3 years ago, very devastating cancer. And he fought it, lost a whole year, got out of it. But as part of the treatment he was getting, it sparked off leukemia. So for the last year, he's been treated for leukemia. He got the all clear the other day on his birthday, which was wonderful. But it was a really St. James's Hospital is the best in the world in that area. They were fantastic. And I get very angry when people talk about the Irish Health Service and the quality of medicine. Now, maybe there are areas and places where it isn't so good. But in terms of being world class, when people talk about third world health,
no, they have no idea.
It's nonsense.
I had a stroke a few years ago, and I would have been in that school of anti-this, and I can tell you, I wouldn't swap the treatment I got for those 3 years anywhere else.
So Nick has got through all of that.
How old is he?
He's 36.
Wow.
And he, after his cancer, he wasn't keen to go back to the world that he'd been in, the techie world or whatever. And my wife, Mary, said to him one night, Nick, if you were 18 again, what would you like to be? He said, I'd love to be a chef. And she said, become a chef then. And he went off and trained in Ballymaloe, and then his illness, the leukemia came. So he's now at the stage where he's starting again. But he's a fabulous guy with a lovely Indian wife and a daughter. So he's a hugely important part of my life and my wife's life at this stage. But he is a great example of somebody who is stoic, brave, not complaining, and resilient above all.
But is it an Irish way to be stoic and keep going? Or is that a narrative we talk about ourselves, or is that part of our DNA?
I never thought of it in terms of being Irish or DNA, or I suppose I was just focused on Nicholas, and so I wasn't thinking in those terms, and I wouldn't know really.
And where'd you go then to get your strength to oversee and get through that? Because you seem always very calm and you're accepting of things in a controlled way.
I think that's true, and that's something that I can't claim any credit for particularly. I have always been a calm sort of person, and I hold back. And what people would say, look, that I'm fair-minded and common sense, and I think I am. And I don't rush to judge. I have done a bit aegis of myself at times. We all have by getting things wrong. But I say it's one of my strongest qualities, this sort of sense of slight detachment. Now, you could be critical and say maybe you're not sufficiently emotionally engaged. And that's probably true. That detachment, you can stand back and see things.
But you're always like that. That wasn't something that came as a result of being in the media or politics. It's always part of your personality, wasn't it?
I suppose so. I never thought of it, but
I remember as a lecturer, you're always engaging, but, you never got the sense you were distant. But you obviously knew you can't be emotionally involved with every student you have, know everybody's business. Yeah. That's not physically possible when you're exposed that way. So you must learn to manage it. And politics, it hardens you up to say you can't give of yourself every day.
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose so. And I suppose as well, there's the obverse, or not the obverse, but maybe the negative side, that in politics, I wasn't committed enough. I wasn't hungry enough. Yeah. I didn't want it that badly.
You think?
I do, yeah. And you could call it laziness as well. That's another word for it that some people have used. But so it's complex.
Yeah. And in terms of your own struggles, you had your own personal physical struggle, and you've got hemochromatosis.
Oh, yeah.
Then you got diabetic, became diabetic.
Yeah.
And how do you get treatment regularly, don't you?
I got hemochromatosis about 25 years ago now, and I never heard of it.
Either that.
Too much iron in your blood, which can block up your heart and your all sorts of things. So when it was diagnosed, I was told I had it, and I had a huge amount of iron in my system, and the only way to get it out was phlebotomy and bleeding every 2 weeks for a couple of years, and it worked. It was hard going, but it worked. And I was glad it was diagnosed. I had a great GP, Paul Casey, and he diagnosed it early on. So I got treated. And then, as you know, I like a few pints. And fairly early on, I had a consultant, and he said to me, and I remember, he said, apart from a glass of champagne on Christmas Day, you will never drink again. And I went off drink for a while, and I became a terrible bore, and I drove everyone mad because I became puritanical. Yeah. And anyway, a very good friend of mine, Oliver Keenan, who's accident and emergency specialist, he said to me, I don't think you have to stay off drink completely. I'll get you a different consultant. So he put me on to John Hegarty, who was wonderful, and John said, no, I think you're okay. So I was able to go back and drink. And the hemochromatosis is totally gone now. It's all gone. Yeah, I have diabetes. I control it. I'm very lucky control.
And one didn't lead to the other. The one doesn't provoke the other? Or just
No.
But you had a band. You had how many frivolities in one day? You had one day where you were very over with Aran, weren't you?
Oh, yeah.
And that sounds evil, yeah.
It is, yeah, but I became very passionate about hemochromatosis. And I've stopped now, but I used to be chair of the Irish Hemochromatosis Society. There was a wonderful woman called Margaret Mullett, who was 90 last week, and her family had hemochromatosis. They're all a very distinguished medical family. But she dragged me in to try to publicise it, and we became great friends. But I felt that a huge number of Irish people have it. It can be diagnosed for £0.50 by a simple blood test. Will tell you if you have it or not. And it can be, if caught in time, it can be treated by regular bleeding. So no big cost to the state or anything else. If you get it in time, you prevent people from becoming very ill.
When everything is moving all at once, your workforce, your tech stack, your business, you don't need more tools. You need one solution. That's why Paylocity built a single platform to connect HR, finance, and IT with AI-driven insights and automated workflows that simplify the complex and power what's next. Because when everything comes together in one place, growth comes easy. Experience one place for all your HCM needs. Start now at paylocity.com/one.
Asegúrate un mayo millonario en The Rose Gaming Resort. Acumula entradas durante todo el mes para tener la oportunidad de ganar hasta $1 millón. Gana efectivo en los sorteos cada hora y quédate para la gran final el domingo 24 de mayo. 2 ganadores se llevarán $25,000 en efectivo garantizado. Aumenta tus posibilidades cada miércoles con hasta 15 veces más entradas. Reclama tu mayo millonario. Más de $1 millón en premios pagados cada semana. Solo en The Rose Gaming Resort. Debe ser mayor de 21 años. Problemas con el juego, llama al 1-888-532-3500.
But we got very little engagement from the Department of Health until Mary Harney was minister. She was great. And she said to me, set up a committee, you chair it, write a report, do it in 3 months. And we did that. And we gave in our report on time. And Mary Harney began to implement it. So great changes were made. A lot still to go. But it is the Irish disease, the Celtic disease. It's very prevalent in Boston as well. Yeah. And I'd like to see a bit more investment, bringing GPs more into it. But at least I think we did make an impact as an association. We lobbied hard. We lobbied people in the Dáil. We got a fair bit of support there. So I say that's one of my proudest things of taking over. Not leading, Margaret did all the leading, but playing a key part in getting hemochromatosis into the public awareness.
And the other major achievements you had, you remember? You did address the Senate, didn't you? You did make an address as the first senator, was it? To address the first non-member to formally address the Seanad in 2011 was given to you as an achievement.
Yes, that was after I had gone, and I had hadn't written it. I had chaired the committee with great Joe O'Toole and Maurice Hayes, God rest him, recommending Seanad reform. Yeah. So I was invited in, but
tell him what to do.
But it wasn't it was a hostile reception behind many fellows why their jobs should be abolished.
Yeah,
it wasn't great. No, I think the part of my life that I'd liked most is writing. And sadly, since COVID, I haven't really had the energy to write again. I'd love to get down to it, and I'd try this summer and maybe a few small projects. We spend a lot of time in the summer now in France, in a wonderful place called Collioure.
Where's that?
It's down just below Perpignan on the Spanish border.
Very nice.
It's where Matisse and Picasso and all of these all hung out around there. And it's not fashionable, but it's lovely. It's a beautiful place, and I did a lot of writing there.
You've always had a relationship with France, haven't you?
Well, I have. My first wife. She is French still, and we have a very good relationship. And that's due in great part to my wife, Mary, who didn't see any great point in. We had split up, but it was as friendly as these things can be. It wasn't friendly, but it wasn't bitter. And Mary made a great point of building up a relationship with Isabel, and it stands to both their credits. I mean, it reached the stage at one point where we were having dinner with Emmanuel, her husband. I called him my husband-in-law. The four of us were having a dinner, and suddenly I realised that the two women were talking about me over my head. Is he still drinking as much? Those Johns are a bit much. I suddenly realised, I said to them, if they didn't shut up, I'd go a third time. So anyway.
C'est la vie, and they talking around you.
Yeah.
And then rugby is your big thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I was never any good at rugby. I played on the wing for Lansdowne Third Seas when Colin Madigan, who had a pub in Rathmines, was captain of it. I'm a fanatical Leinster supporter. I think the only bit of real bigotry in my life is
blue. It's a real blue shirt.
It's a real blue shirt there, yeah. And I got a season ticket the minute they came out back 22 or 3 years ago. And I never miss a home match, and I've been to most of the finals. I think my travelling days are over now, but I love Leinster rugby.
And is this the year?
I don't know. They were very good. I mean, we gave away 3 silly tries, but they were playing great rugby at the moment. So, look, I've stopped. I just
predict
if it happens, it happens, and that's it. Yeah.
And music is something in your life or not?
Sadly, no. This is really not my fault particularly. I'm totally non-musical. I can't sing at all. And I always regretted this. I loved being part of a sing-song, so I was usually a band. There was one day in Rockwell when I was a student, and the entire school was in the church for a rehearsal, and they were singing the great song, Go Ye Afar, Go Teach All Nations. It's a great Holy Ghost song. Bear witness unto me, I still remember it. But the priest, Father Walker, known as Johnny, stopped. There's somebody causing discord. This side don't sing. Then he came, and after eliminating, he said, Maurice, you have to leave. I was putting the whole church out. But music, yes. I mean, my default radio station is Lyric. I listen to Radio 3 an awful lot of the time as well. And curiously, plain chant and Gregorian chant are my favourites. And I think I feel a bit like Francois Mitterrand about life after death and all of that, that he said his head tells him no, his heart says something else. And I have the same sense. I'm not a practicing Catholic, but the liturgy, the music, says something to me that I can't really explain in words, but it's something that's there. And when I die, I certainly want an old-fashioned, proper Catholic funeral with all the bells, a little bit of the De Profundis thrown in, because it's not all that happy a day. Like they keep saying at the moment, it's the resurrection. But anyway, and one of my favourites of all is the Salve Regina.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the most beautiful, soulful bits of music, but it also has very happy memories for me, because one of my great friends in life was Gus Martin, Augustine Martin.
Yeah. Another textbook we used to learn our English.
That's right, and Gus larger than life. And there used to be great parties, drink-fueled parties in his house in Leopardstown. But Gus would always end the evening, because he'd been in school in Roscrea and he'd been a teacher there, and he had a great love for the Cistercians. But Gus would always end out in the garden singing the Salve Regina at 3 a.m. But it's always stuck with me. You know, wherever I can find that sort of music. But music as well. I mean, I love McCormack, John McCormack, because he reminds me of growing up as a child in Bagenalstown, up my granny's house where the wireless would be on, and to be all sitting around listening to John McCormack. Everyone had the daddy of them all, he'd say. And he'd listen to that. I love McCormack and Chrisley and all of these. And other music then as well. Sometimes you were much too young, but there was the Walton programme, Leo Maguire, and the Banbacaley Band. And it just brings back Saturday afternoons as a child in Bagenalstown when it would come on. And music, like as well, Bill Bailey. These sort of things, suddenly I'm back in Bagenalstown at age 16 or 15. And you're at an age and they bring you back and there's memories of people there. Yep.
And did any of your siblings stay in Bagenalstown or did they all leave?
Well, Conor is dead and there are 9 of us left. A few of us are in Dublin. My brother Joe, who is a great guy who was worked in Sierra Leone, and he's now the honorary consul of Sierra Leone in Ireland, working from the Market Square in Bagenalstown. But anyway, so he's there. He ran for politics and he was on the county council for years. But he has a great sense of place. And he knows everybody. He knows. And I love listening to his stories about the characters in Bagenalstown and around there as well.
And is there poetry? Is there a poem that you go to? You being a writer, do you disregard it?
It's funny. My reading, you're going to ask me, have I a favourite book? And I don't.
Yeah. Because
my reading changed with every aspect. As your life changes, your reading patterns change. And I mean, I remember my first reading was Rachel Crompton, the Just Williams stories, when I was about 11 or 12. Yeah. And I couldn't. And I binge read. If I find somebody, I'll read everything they've done. And I've gone through, in my teens, late teens, influenced by my education, I was a very romantic Catholic. And Chesterton and Belloc. And I still love Belloc, and I think some of his lines will always stand the test. And Chesterton is still a very good read, but I read everything I could get. And it went on, I'd find some, in my recent times, I binged on Maigret. I've read every one of the 125 or so Maigret books, and I think he's one of our greatest writers. I think John Banville agrees with me on that, but he captures France and Paris, and he does it as nobody else can do. And they're good yarns as well. At the moment, I prefer diaries, biographies. I read the 2,000-page diaries of A.C. Benson, whom probably nobody knows who he was today, but he was the best-selling pre-First World War author, and his diaries bring you right into the world of Edwardian England. And he knew everybody, and from politicians, and he was narky and uncharitable, which is the best sort of diarist because they're not going to quote things. But I read him, but I mean diaries at the moment, diaries and letters. I read a lot of biography. I mean, the 2 or 3 best books I've read recently, one is, and I can't think of the author's name, but the title is Jesus Wept. And it's an incredibly good account of the last 5 popes and all that happened. And it's dramatic and it's fair and the frightening and depressing as well. David McCullough's 2-volume biography of Dev is one of the best biographical efforts I've read. He's well trained. He's well trained. I have to declare an interest there. Because I spend so much time in France, I'm fascinated I get into French stuff a lot. And I'm fascinated by the whole French experience, the occupation, because France, like one of the great privileges of my life was to share the decade of centenaries on commemorations here. But France, we did it well. France refuses to face up to its past, where it did embrace Vichy, it did collaborate, and there was very little accounting afterwards, and coming to terms with that. So I'm fascinated by de Gaulle and by Pétain and all of that, and there's some great stuff being written there.
Does it impress you about human nature? Human nature is funny, isn't it? The idea is one can be idealistic, but people kind of shatter that, you think, when you look back at history or different times.
Yeah. I remember my friend Pat Claffey, who's a priest in our area. He was a great friend of Conor Cruz O'Brien. He was talking to Conor at the end of Conor's life, and everything Conor had stood for had failed. Yeah. Everything. And he asked him, and Conor simply said, "That's what history does." And I thought it was a very profound comment. That's what history does. Yeah. We're looking at it at the moment. I mean, what the places is going to happen with Trump. Oh, yeah. It's too frightening. This isn't the place to talk about it, but it does give a bit of depth to Conor's point. That's what history does. And
I often feel, Thomas Garvin is gone, but as I said, his first lecture on a Saturday morning to me was the strength of the US political system.
Indeed.
And everything I learned from him that first Saturday has been thrown in the bin. And if Tom was here to listen to that, he'd be shocked.
He would be shocked.
To see it unravel the way it's unraveling. Yeah. Because you all thought it was impossible.
Yeah, Tom was a very good lecturer, very good thinker. And he did have a great belief in the American Constitution. He lectured about it for years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Believed in it.
And to sum up in your life, in a few words, looking back, are you amazed, shocked, surprised, or you kind of planned? And you say it wasn't planned, but how do you feel?
I remember a fella saying to me, a German, way back when I was a student, about my career path. And he had planned his. He was German.
Yeah, well.
I said, what? And everything more or less seems to have just happened. Yeah. I didn't have a career path. I mean, I'm very lucky. Things seem to be coming, like being appointed at such an early age. Suddenly, when I was kicked out of politics, being asked to chair the Human Rights Commission, being asked by Enda Kenny to chair the Decade of Centenaries. These were all things that happened to me. But I suppose they happened to me because I was by and large ready for them. But I don't know. There was no plan.
Maurice Manning, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for joining us on Aran on Discs.
Thanks, Russell.
Before we had AT&T Business Wireless coverage, our delivery GPS wasn't the most reliable. Once our driver had to do a 14-point turn to get back on route. A 14-point turn! An influencer even live-streamed the whole thing. Not good for business. Now with AT&T Business Wireless, routes are updating on the fly and deliveries are on time. And the influencer did get us 53 new followers, though.
AT&T Business Wireless. Connecting changes everything.
That's the sound of a tree in Tennessee's Great Smoky Mountains, releasing volatile organic compounds, which is just a fancy way of saying it's creating fog. And that makes the Smokies smoky. This is one of many sounds in Tennessee with a story to tell. To hear them in person, plan your trip at tnvacation.com. Tennessee sounds perfect.
The Rose Gaming Resort, where new members play for free. Sign up for a rewards card and get $125 in guaranteed free play across your first 5 visits. The Rose Gaming Resort, home of the largest jackpots in Virginia. Over $1 million paid out weekly.